There are reports tonight that the Occupy the Wall Street movement had its largest demonstration ever today with about 2,000 people, including labor union members, protesting in New York's downtown financial district. But my next guest says there's a piece of the puzzle these demonstrators don't get, that Wall Street creates jobs and kickstarts the economy. It's federal regulations that are, in his words, only Charlie could say this, choking the golden tax revenue goose. Here to explain why these protesters and lawmakers on Capitol Hill have it all wrong is my good buddy, Fox Business senior correspondent Charlie Gasparino.
Did I actually say that?
This was a Gasparino phrase in one of your pieces. You write so many, I don't know where I read it. We read it earlier this morning.
It was in the New York Post.
What do you mean by it?
Well, I just wanted to point out the sort of irony here. If you listen to the barely coherent message coming out of those demonstrations, and those kids are barely coherent. I mean, they're all over the place in terms of what their quote-unquote goals are. And we use goals in the broadest possible terms when you're discussing this movement. You hear them say stuff like the bankers are bad, they make a lot of money, they're bad, and guess what? They need to pay more because we need to finance a bigger welfare state. And that's essentially what they're saying. You know, there's too many cutbacks in New York City government. Right. These are tough times. Let's screw the bankers to pay for this big welfare state, which we think is all well and good. My point in writing this column for the New York Post, which has generated a lot of controversy. I mean, I'm getting all these emails and Twitters from these protesters.
I love when you stir the pot, Charlie.
Well, and my only point was, okay, if you really want Wall Street to pay more, don't create laws that force them to fire Wall Street executives, get out of lucrative lines of businesses,
right?
And those businesses pay a lot of tax monies to New York City.
Is this really economics 101, where people don't understand that private enterprise produces prosperity and produces jobs the government doesn't?
Well, you know, listen, you could almost expect it for some of these barely coherent kids. I mean, these are kids that, you know, are taking time off from collecting their trust fund accounts and, you know, their classes at the New School of Social Research to protest. So you can almost understand why they don't understand economics. The real question is, why doesn't Barney Frank understand?
Why doesn't Mike Bloomberg understand economics? Mike Bloomberg wants to give away the store. He's the biggest nanny stater around, right. And he regulates, to a lesser extent than the Feds, Wall Street.
I could be wrong, but I don't think Mike Bloomberg thought that the financial reform overhaul, Dodd-Frank, named after Barney Frank and Chris Dodd,
right.
The former head of the banking committee and the Senate banking, and he's still a congressman, but he was House Financial Services Committee
chair.
I don't think that he was in favor of that law. Listen, there needed to be some sort of re-regulation after the financial collapse, no doubt. But you know, when they went after these banks on some of the stuff in Dodd-Frank, half the stuff they have to get out of had nothing to do with the financial collapse.
Correct. It was just the government putting its fingers in the pie and controlling things. You made an interesting point in the article this morning, and that is, when we have seen crises in the past, we've waited and they've been over. Wall Street has come roaring back.
Yep.
You predicted that this crisis will be long-term and that the government is at the root of the length of that term. How so?
The reason why Bank of America is laying off 30,000 people over the next 5 years is not because they expect business to be lousy for the next 5 years. They expect, business conditions. They expect costs of regulations. Think about
costs of complying with
regulations to be killing. Think about how absurd it is. People are attacking Bank of America. And by the way, I beat up these guys every day. I'm not a big defender of the banks. Reporters I see attacking Bank of America for raising these fees on certain on use of debit cards.
Right.
Why are they doing that? Did any of these reporters, these are business reporters, did they ever sit back and say, why is Bank of America doing that? They're doing that because inside Dodd-Frank, there was a special provision that forced them to pay higher fees to the federal government.
Wow. Wow. And
you know this thing by Durbin?
Right, I know.
Dick Durbin.
And yet there's a proposal this morning that would abolish the debit card fees, which is effectively trying to solve a problem caused by regulation with more regulation.
It's just so absurd. That this Durbin amendment was just so bizarre. And, you know, people attack Bank of America because of this. I'm not saying Bank of America is they're good guys there.
They're a victim of the government.
In this case, it's so obvious. And by the way, what do regulated entities do when you increase the regulation and cost? Well, they pass to the consumer.
Right, right. Or they lay off 30,000 employees. Charlie, it's a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.